Can I actually figure out why dogs stare at people for seemingly no reason? Or have most of us completely misunderstood what dogs are really doing when they quietly watch us for long periods of time? Almost every dog owner has experienced it at some point. You look up from your phone, your laptop, or across the room, and your dog is already staring directly at you like they have been watching you for several minutes. At first, it feels funny. But after a while, many owners start wondering what is actually going on inside the dog's mind. Some dogs stare constantly throughout the day, while others suddenly become intensely observant during emotional moments, routine changes, or unfamiliar situations happening around the home. The more dogs I observed closely, the more I realized this behavior was often much deeper than simple attention seeking. Some dogs stared softly and calmly, while others became highly focused whenever owners changed emotional tone, moved around the environment differently, or started doing something unusual around the house. That completely changed how I viewed canine staring behavior. One experience especially stayed with me. I once spent time around a rescue dog that rarely barked, rarely demanded affection directly, and generally stayed quiet around people most of the day. But the dog watched humans constantly. Whenever someone stood up suddenly, changed rooms, altered their tone of voice, or emotionally shifted during conversations, the dog immediately focused on them with intense attention. At first, I assumed the dog was simply nervous or overly alert. But over time, it became obvious the dog was trying to understand the environment continuously through human behavior. That moment completely changed my understanding of why many dogs stare at people. The dog was not staring randomly. The dog was gathering emotional information. One thing many people misunderstand is that dogs evolved around humans for thousands of years and gradually became extraordinarily skilled at reading body language, routines, movement patterns, facial expressions, emotional tension, and changes happening around them throughout the day. In many ways, dogs survive socially by watching humans carefully. That emotional observation becomes a huge part of how dogs understand the world around them. Another thing that surprised me repeatedly was how differently dogs stare depending on emotional situation and personality. Some dogs stare casually and affectionately, while others become highly focused during uncertainty, stress, excitement, confusion, overstimulation, or emotionally unfamiliar situations. Context changes everything. A relaxed dog quietly watching an owner from across the room usually communicates something very different from a tense dog holding an intense fixed stare during stressful situations. One thing that changed my perspective completely was realizing many dogs stare because humans themselves become emotional reference points inside the dog's world. Dogs constantly monitor trusted humans to judge whether situations feel calm, stressful, exciting, dangerous, safe, or unfamiliar. This becomes especially obvious in emotionally observant breeds and deeply bonded dogs. Some dogs repeatedly glance toward owners during uncertain situations, almost like they are checking for emotional guidance. If the trusted human remains calm and emotionally stable, many dogs naturally relax too because they are emotionally reading the human response before deciding how they themselves should react. That emotional checking behavior is incredibly important. One moment that stayed with me involved a nervous dog sitting inside a busy outdoor cafe for the first time. The dog kept staring at the owner every few seconds while unfamiliar movement, loud sounds, and strangers surrounded the environment constantly. At first, the behavior looked almost obsessive. But eventually it became obvious the dog was using the owner almost like an emotional anchor inside an unfamiliar environment. Watching the owner closely helped the dog feel more emotionally secure while processing everything happening around him. That distinction changed everything for me. Another hidden truth many owners discover is that dogs often become extraordinarily familiar with human routines over time because they continuously study movement patterns, emotional rhythms, household timing, and everyday behavior throughout the day. Many dogs eventually learn to predict walks, feeding schedules, work routines, visitors arriving at the home, car rides, and bedtime habits long before humans realize how closely the dog has been quietly observing everyday life. That level of observation surprises many owners once they begin noticing how early dogs react to familiar patterns. One thing that shocked me repeatedly was how emotionally attentive some dogs become during difficult periods inside homes. Dogs often notice sadness, illness, anxiety, frustration, arguments, emotional tension, or unusual behavior changes much earlier than many owners expect. Some dogs begin watching owners more closely during emotionally difficult periods without humans even realizing the behavior itself has changed. That emotional attentiveness is one reason many people feel dogs are deeply connected to human emotions. Another major truth many people eventually realize is that staring behavior is not always emotional affection alone. Some dogs stare because they are trying to solve problems, predict routines, understand situations, or anticipate what humans are about to do next. Dogs are extremely observant learners. Over time, many dogs naturally realize humans are connected to the most important events happening throughout daily life. Food appears through humans, walks happen through humans, routines change through humans, and emotional atmosphere inside the environment often shifts through humans too. One thing that changed my perspective completely was realizing dogs often communicate silently far more than humans realize. Many dogs rarely express emotional connection through barking or dramatic behavior alone. Instead, they quietly observe, monitor, anticipate, and emotionally process the environment by watching humans constantly throughout the day. That silent observation becomes a huge part of the human-dog relationship. Another hidden truth is that some staring behavior can signal uncertainty, stress, confusion, or emotional discomfort rather than affection. That is why body language matters enormously when interpreting canine staring behavior. A relaxed body, soft eyes, calm posture, and loose movement usually communicate something very different from a stiff body, fixed stare, tense posture, and emotionally heightened behavior surrounding the dog. One thing that surprised me repeatedly was how much staring behavior increased once dogs formed stronger emotional attachment to owners over time. Dogs that barely acknowledged people initially sometimes became highly attentive once emotional trust started building gradually inside the relationship. That emotional attentiveness often deepens as trust grows stronger. Another major truth many people eventually discover is that dogs do not separate emotional safety and observation the way humans often do. Dogs constantly gather emotional information from movement, routines, posture, facial tension, timing, and environmental patterns all day long. And much of that process happens simply through watching. One thing dogs constantly reveal is that staring is rarely random. In many situations, dogs are studying emotional information, predicting routines, seeking reassurance, monitoring safety, strengthening connection, or quietly trying to understand the humans they trust most. And once I started understanding that, dogs staring at people stopped feeling strange entirely. The more dogs I observed closely, the more I realized many dogs stare at humans not because they are obsessed or weird, but because humans have gradually become the emotional center of how dogs interpret safety, routine, connection, and the world around them.